Vaccine, these are saving children, these are saving women, these are preventing women from the scourge of cervical cancer. So I'm amazed to think and to hear that so far ICDDRB has conducted more than 100 vaccine trials. Doing a vaccine trial is no joke. Not only you need resources, you need to mobilize people, and these people are in thousands. You have to make them understand that this is a vaccine you should take. And there's a lot of hype, there's a lot of sensitivity involved. So you can imagine what pain the investigators had to take. And then more than 100 vaccine trials. And there he is, Dr. Zaman, who himself was associated with more than 70 vaccine trials. Sometimes when I think about it, I just shudder. How can we do it? How can Dr. Zaman and other scientists like Dr. Kadri and others, they could have done this work? Then we have many other things that ICDDRB is now doing. And in public health, if I keep counting, I think I will lose, sight of what has been done. So much has been the, contribution of these people, the scientists, the people who work in the fields, the people who work in the hospitals, the people who work in Matlab, in Chakoria, in other parts of the country. And not just that, many of our scientists, they go out and work with colleagues in countries in Africa, in India, in Pakistan. Recently, a small team went to Pakistan to monitor the progress of a joint study that ICDDRB is doing along with 5 other countries. This is a WHO-led study. So imagine what they are doing, having to go to different parts of the world. Many of these sites are not very basic, and you can imagine the working conditions there. And yet, the work goes on. And not just biomedical science. I must also tell you about the social science that is being done, about all the very important things that lead to, laws being enacted in the country, that lead to very specific recommendations that go to various international agencies. And this is the work of ICDDRB. Very recently, there was an important work done, and that was on a vaccine against cervical cancer. So currently there is only one vaccine, and as you can imagine, there's a huge demand for this vaccine, and quite often we get stockouts. So ICDDRB tested that vaccine, an alternative vaccine. It was found to be as good as the original vaccine. As soon as the results were announced, the World Health Organization did not lose any time, immediately endorsed this alternative vaccine. And they did it because they wanted the vaccine to be available to adolescent girls, to women all over the world. So you can see the work done by our scientists, Dr. Zaman and many others, Dr. Rubana, who is here, that, dictates policy for the entire world. And I'm so proud that today, when we are celebrating the 64th anniversary of ICDDRB, we see it's so much of gratitude, that, ICDDRB scientists, ICDDRB workers, they have been able to do so much. Najmul, please, over here. Right in the front. So today, in order to celebrate this, one part is the celebrations that are going downstairs. I'm sure you have seen the color, the flamboyance and everything, I just spent some time there, and I thought that after this lecture, I would take our speaker and friends and, visit these stalls again and have a taste of the pithas and other things. But an important thing today is this special keynote lecture. Last year, when we had this event, we had another very distinguished speaker, Dr. Binayak Sen of the Bangladesh Institute of Development Economics. And today we have another speaker, equally elegant, Qazi Khalid Ashraf. I'm sure that Shubho is going to introduce him, but what Shubho will not be able to tell about him, that I am going to tell about him, because I went to school from class 5. We were together first in Bhavani Academy and then in St. Gregory's High School. We had a wonderful time, not just being students, being friends, but also the intellectual capabilities that were sharpened by us being together and through the very good offices of our then headmaster, Brother Robert. I can just tell you one thing. Qazi Khalid is an architect, but when he was in school, he wanted to be an astrophysicist. He thought that he would study astronomy, and he wanted to apply for the GCE O-level. At that time, there was none in the country who knew about astronomy, okay? But still, he wanted to pursue that. So he applied, and then Brother Robert, he volunteered to give him a telescope, okay? He studied on his own, and I still remember one day, he took his telescope on the roof of the school. In fact, we had a church, and I think that was the roof of the church somewhere there. And we all went there, and he tried to explain everything about Milky Way, this and that. Few of the things we understood, many of the things we never understood. But then Khalid appeared at the exam, and he did qualify, astronomy, the only one from Bangladesh so far who had taken this exam. Following that, he decided to take architecture as his next frontier, and this is what he is today. I used to sit with him in the same class, side by side, and every time I used to see, while listening to the class lectures and everything, he was scribbling down. And you know what he was scribbling? All the cartoons, because he is a very famous cartoonist. If you are of my age, you would recall Unmad, the famous cartoon magazine. And Qazi Khalid Ashraf happens to be one of the co-editors of Unmad. So all through school, Qazi, I think you spent much less time on maths and other things, but more time on cartoon. And yet, you have become one of the most famous architects of the country. Without further ado, I would ask Shubho to introduce him formally, and then I look forward to hearing today from Khalid. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamit Bhai, for your insightful words and inspiring reflections. So, in regards to Unmad, it's not only your age. We are also a fan of Unmad as well. I'm sure there are many fans of Unmad here as well. So it is now my great honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Qazi Khalid Ashraf. Dr. Ashraf is a renowned Bangladeshi architect, urbanist, and architectural historian. He holds a bachelor's degree in architecture from Bangladesh University of Engineering and Technology, which is BUET, a master's from MIT, and a PhD from University of Pennsylvania. He currently serves as the Director General of the Bengal Institute of Architecture, Landscapes, and Settlements. Beyond his professional accolades, Dr. Ashraf is a creative visionary. He co-founded Unmad, a beloved cartoon magazine, in 1978 and contributed as a cartoonist. His multidisciplinary expertise encompasses architecture, urbanism, and writing, with a particular focus on the dynamics of Dhaka and the architecture of Bangladesh. Today, he will deliver a fascinating talk on Architecture is Bigger Than Architecture, the Making of Healthy Cities. Dr. Ashraf will take us on a journey through the historic connection between architecture and health, exploring how cities shape public health through both innovation and challenges. He will also present 12 actionable points to build a healthier, more livable Dhaka. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Qazi Khalid Ashraf. Sir.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Tahmid Ahmed, and for the introduction. Already you have set me up on a very lighter platform, Unmad magazine, and I have to slowly proceed to heading towards more difficult topics. But Pratham kaj aage, if I'm not right in saying this, happy birthday ICDDRB. Yes. I know it's in December, but still, what a great festivity. And I must say, I'm so privileged and proud to be present here talking to you. For me, it's a privilege because we have always considered ICDDRB to be such a remarkable organization, since 1964, conducting such landmark programs. So seriously, a salute to all the scientists, the staff, the people involved with ICDDRB since 1964 and now. You should be all proud of yourselves, as we are. So I noted that I am very mindful for I'm speaking today at ICDDRB, a center of excellence in public health. And I speak here as an architect. And so therefore the inevitable question is, how is architecture and health connected? I should say deeply, very deeply. Health and architecture. But initially it seems to be an odd pair, but I'll come to that. But I would like to say that the relationship between architecture and health is an ancient topic. Oftentimes we have forgotten that for a lot of separate development of where architecture went towards and how health and the whole sort of the discipline of health has become. But we should recall that it has an ancient relationship. Especially with public health, at least we can claim that the city is at the core of the business of public health. That still is. So there is still a kind of solid relationship. So let me tell you a few things before I proceed with the main topic of my talk. And the talk is kind of divided into 4 parts, and I'll say some introductory things about architecture and health. And I'll talk a little bit about the city broadly, and then I'll come to Dhaka, which is, the focus of my own attention and the work that we do at Bengal Institute for Architecture, Landscapes and Settlements, and the kind of thing that we have been doing for the last 20 years or so in our own small way. So regarding the scope of architecture, the first thing to perhaps tell you what architects do. I mean, we talk about architecture today primarily in aesthetical terms. How a building looks, how a building appears, that seems to be the most common perception of architecture. But that's only one way to look at architecture. When I say architecture is bigger than architecture, I mean 2 things. I mean that one should return to the primary goals of architecture, which is to think of architecture as a place of wellness and well-being. And I'm showing you a few slides here. The one on the left is from Renaissance Europe and one on the right from China. The one on the left shows a depiction of, there are some diagrams around that human body. So it's an ancient sort of trope or relationship that people try to establish between buildings and the human body, as well as between the human body and the city. So the human body, building, and the city, the concepts of these three circulated amongst each other. So how a body functions, what is the organizational framework of the body, as well as then a building or a city. We often now describe some parts of the city as the lungs of the city, like the parks and greenery and all that. So we use those metaphors. But where are these metaphors coming from? They come from this shared notion of wellness and well-being. You must have heard of Vastu Shastras and Feng Shui, which are ancient texts, both in India and China, and now used in many other places, that typically deal with how you should place and make buildings. Oftentimes there's a lot of superstitious things that have gathered around Vastu Shastras and Feng Shui, but let me tell you that they are really based on a science of well-being. So those ancient texts are really a science of well-being. How a proper orientation of a building should be. What should be the proper slope of a site to drain away water. So I think those texts can be recollected, relived even now to think about the combination of making buildings and with how you should fare yourself well. In ancient Greece, architects were trained not only in the trade of making buildings, but they also had to learn about medicine. We have forgotten that. Because both architecture and medicine were geared towards well-being and wellness. And I was showing a drawing from Renaissance Europe, where certain buildings were located near a hill or a hilly area, and internal air from the hills were drawn through caverns into the building to circulate there as fresh water and cooler air. Those buildings were called pneumatic buildings. So it's a play on the word pneuma, the breath of life. Just to let you know some of these things, it's also related to what we have in Bengali Probad Bakko Khonar Bachon, where the building should face the south. And why should it face the south? Is for a basic reason, ventilation. So air, pneuma, the air we breathe, the air we intake, the air that flows, is fundamental to well-being, as we all know. I show you a slide from an exhibition at the Canadian Centre of Architecture, where the curators were showing a different relationship of the human body and the city, where the human body itself circulates in the spaces of the city. That's what it's shown. And the body itself has a lot of circulatory parts and organs. And the study was how a body, or how we as individuals, like today I spent, more than half an hour coming from where I am. Walking would take me 15 minutes. But by walking, how we engage ourselves with the city. And at the same time, the city impacts us bodily. So that was a kind of study. But going back to air and breathing and wellness, in the colonial period, when English architects and engineers were working here and living here, they were really afraid of one thing in the tropics, what they call the miasma. It's the sort of the dark, that's their perception, the dark, dank air that gathers in spaces, especially in swampy area. Even it could happen in buildings. They're really afraid of that. And they considered miasma to be a noxious bad air that led to cholera and Black Death, if I'm not mistaken. It's a pretty earlier than the 19th century, but that was the perception. And in devising, creating buildings in this part of the world, in Bengal, they learned from Bengali vernacular building tradition. Kuregor theke colonial building, the bungalow. So the bungalow was a colonial invention in fear of the miasma, but they learned from the Bengali rural huts to create the colonial building type, which was really a particular, I mean, there are other aspects of the bungalow. The primary concern is to acquire ventilation. Now I'm showing you some slides from the 19th century. This is, I believe, in London, a slum in London. So we know that in the 19th century, with the onset of industrialization, there was an urban explosion in European cities, especially in London, Manchester, Paris, other cities. Well, of course, industrialization brought in all kinds of new possibilities, but it was also an upsurge of health crisis. Thousands left rural areas and flocked the city for employment in factories. It sounds very familiar to us, but in the 19th century, that was what was happening in Europe. So people flocked like this, they lived like this. This is what is described as a slum in London. There was no planned accommodation for all these people coming to the cities. They piled up many families in one room. Sewage was open on the streets, and tuberculosis and cholera were rife. And in the meantime, factories, belched out dark fumes and smoke. It was a major crisis for Europe, a health crisis. But what is important for me as an architect, it is against that context, innovative thinking in architecture and city planning developed. What we know as modern architecture today, and I'm showing you one example from 1929. So look at the language of the building. It's a very pristine, white color, clear, clean building. And that was the idea, clean, white, and open. And we think that clean, white, open in buildings is a modern sort of spatial planning idea. No, it arose from a response to the health crisis. Similarly, in planning, the call for sanitary spaces in the city led to what is known today as modern urban planning. So both modern architecture and modern urban planning were triggered by the health crisis in Europe. So I want to emphasize that. But I want to show you this building by a very famous architect from Finland, Alvar Aalto. It's a tuberculosis sanatorium. They did all kinds of buildings, but especially, fortunately, I have this building, the Paimio Sanatorium. And there's some images from the inside, what I meant by open, clean. There is sort of no extra things. Every corner is kind of accessible, so you could clean it up. So the Paimio Sanatorium represented those conditions that happened in the 19th century, and these buildings showed a vision for what architecture can be and should be, not only for aesthetical reasons, but for health reasons and ethical reasons. And that is why the language of modern architecture got so established in Europe from the 20s onwards, 30s, 40s, and then circulated all over the world. But all over the world, it circulated because of its stylistic reason. People adopted, the clean, white, nature of buildings. Alvar Aalto himself, this is a terrace on the roof of the sanatorium because, from what I understand, instead of regular treatment, the treatment was to be in the sun, out in the open, so that was one primary treatment, which is, I would like to argue, Dr. Tahmid, that it's a spatial way of getting treated, not a sort of medicinal way of getting treatment. Alvar Aalto, he himself declared this building as a cathedral to health and an instrument for healing. So the building itself is an instrument or a tool for healing. I want to emphasize that. Okay, going forward, going very forward, and then COVID-19 hit us. COVID-19, it generated a new attention on cities and their spaces. I'm showing you here a street in Philadelphia, a city I know very well because I have another home there. The outset of COVID, as we all know, was seen also as a clash of biomes, the ever-increasing boundaries of the human in which the footprint of the city is running amok. We don't know what the footprint of the city is. It's ever increasing. Think of Dhaka. Where will it end? What is the boundary of the city? And in that way, if you think of other cities, if it continues expanding, it will then engage and then get conflicted with other ecologies in which humans and non-humans engage with each other, often with deadly results. Well, we know that prior to the COVID, another thing to note, urban mapping was very important. It was employed in the 19th century, in the 20th century for the purposes of detecting tuberculosis and cholera and other public diseases, and then that helped health officials to map, the location of these diseases. At the same time, during COVID, mapping was a very important instrument or tool. But what I'm highlighting here is during COVID, people fled the arena of public spaces. We avoided contacts, gathering like this was not encouraged, totally avoided. But this is what the city is about, proximity, being together. So people could not avoid that either. So cities like Philadelphia and many other cities developed new norms. I've lived in Philadelphia for 30 years. Philadelphia was not known for street side dining or cafes. I don't know why, so it was just a health rule. It was a health rule. Not like Paris, everybody's eating on the street, or even in Dhaka, many people eating on the street. But in Philadelphia, no. So in a sense, it was kind of a dull city. But COVID made it very active. The city allowed sidewalk sitting. And not only that, they took away parking spaces. You see some of the chairs are on the street. They took away parking spaces and made them like public space, available for the public. So there was a shift in the imagination of health officials of the city, how public spaces should be used. Not only that, whole street, the car was taken out of the street and made into public spaces, especially for dining and getting together. So the question of health requires a new imagination and innovation also when it comes to the spaces of the city. But I must tell you one thing also. The question, I will also admit this is really not my topic, but I have to mention this. The question of health and being healthy also has a paradox about it. There are important social thinkers who like us to rethink what we consider to be healthy and what we consider to be unhealthy. It's an ongoing discussion in my belief. I'd like to mention the name of one person, Ivan Illich. I don't know if anybody of you are familiar with it. He's a very well-known social scientist, philosopher, writer. He made many of us rethink the methods of technocratization, how we accept technology and how it transforms us. Just think of the phone, how it has transformed us and transforming us. It transforms not only how we do things with the tools of technology, but also how we think, and therefore it changes who we are. Illich wrote on many topics. There's a book on water. It's a beautiful title, H2O and the Waters of Forgetfulness, in which he beautifully pointed out that before, at earlier times, we used to purify things with water. now we have to purify water to do things. So water has become H2O. That's a kind of signal for technologization. He was also one of my professors at the University of Pennsylvania. I really am lucky to be associated with him. So Illich made us alert about how we measure health and being healthy. This is in another book called Medical Nemesis. It's on online PDF, you can look it up, Medical Nemesis. He cited what he called the medicalization of health and the over-professionalization in which being healthy is stuck in the economy of hospitals, drugs, and technical procedures. So think about that. Now, I want to show you this building. All of a sudden, the Salk Institute for Biological Studies. I don't know if anybody is familiar with the building, but I'm sure you're familiar with Jonas Salk. Again, a famous name who pioneered the vaccine for polio. I think there are other people involved, but he not only pioneered, but he made the licensing free. I think it was, anybody could take that up. And also he was involved in the vaccine for AIDS. I show this building because it's a remarkable architectural structure, a stunning architecture that is now a World Heritage Site. And it's been accepted as a remarkable institute for a research center where scientists work, they come together. I'll show you the plan. So this is the courtyard, and flanking the courtyard are actually little pavilions, breakout spaces, and then beyond that are the laboratories. I'll show you a plan. So this is what it looks like in the evening, and twice a year the sun sets in the Pacific Ocean, and it strikes the courtyard and this water channel in the same line during the day of equinox. So this is the courtyard. And this is the plan. And if you can see the plan, that's the courtyard, that's the water channel. Those are the pavilions, and those are the two laboratory spaces, column-free laboratory spaces. So you can work in the laboratory spaces, then you can come to the pavilion and chat with your colleagues, look into the courtyard, which is a signal for your being part of a community, and then the axis of the courtyard goes straight to the Pacific Ocean, that you are part of a bigger world. That's what the architect wanted to emphasize. And I'm showing you this specially for this because here is the architect and Jonas Salk. The architect for the lab is no other than Louis Kahn. Right, so among Louis Kahn's, whom you know very well, I'm sure, for designing the Parliament complex, he did design a few other masterpieces, and the Salk Institute is one of them. But what is also very important, the Salk Institute was developed with very close conversation between the architect and the scientist, between Louis Kahn and Jonas Salk. And it's a big story, everybody talks about it. Okay, so no slides here. So in mentioning the scientist and the architect, I do have to note my relationship with Dr. Tahmid Ahmed, who, I don't know which is a good thing because he just divulged a few sort of secret information, what I did in high school. I didn't even know that. But I'm a proud and honored friend of Dr. Tahmid Ahmed, as I'm sure you are also, a remarkable health scientist working in many fields. In 2022, Tahmid and I conducted conversation on health and the city for our organization, which is on YouTube. If you Google our name, you'll find that. But what is important that a few critical observations came out of that, and I'll share that. We agreed that a healthy city does not have to be beautiful. In doing things in Bangladesh, we have encountered that, there are a lot of beautification projects. I don't know what that means, beautification. Nobody does beautification in other cities, which are really proper, livable city. But this beautification, which is just basically a way of expending money. But the point is, a healthy city doesn't have to be a beautiful city. It can be a very kind of nice, ordinary city, but it can be a healthy city. So it's your choice. You want to live in a city of beautification, or you want to live in a healthy city. To be healthy, it needs, number one, basic medical care and accessibility. Not only that medical care is there, it must be accessible, in a number of ways. Number two, food security to address malnourishment, malnutrition. Three, safety. Safety in many sense from, say, maternal health, and also, say, women walking in the streets. All those are part of being healthy. And then physical activity. You need spaces to move around, not only for athletic purposes, play field and all that, for even just simple walking, which in my city, there is none. People walk, about more than 60% of the people in the city have to walk one way or another to get to where they are, where they should be, work, school, whatnot. But where do they walk? They walk on the road. People don't want to take the sidewalk because the sidewalk doesn't exist. In my view, those are not really sidewalks. We should be ashamed of calling them sidewalk and footpath. So if you don't, this is a very simple, literally pedestrian topic, footpath. Who cares about footpath? But no, footpath to me is the sign of the civility of a city. The sign of a civility of the city that I am free to walk. Not only for going for business purposes and all that, I want to just walk around. That's what a city is. I just want to walk around. You can't. So anyway, with footpath, I get a little agitated, as you can see. So healthy city involves a healthy city involves also improved social practices. This is what with Amit and I discussed around hygiene, garbage, defecation, etc. But please note, those social practices also have a spatial side. They need spaces, right? So social practices around health have, the other side is the spaces where it happens. During the conversation, Tamid mentioned a special case, the stunting in children caused by enteropathy. I learned that from him. Oh, no, slide ashbe. A little dramatic moment. The stunting of children, which I don't have slides, about stunting caused by enteropathy, especially for children in urban slums. It is obvious that it's largely an environmental issue. Pollution, contamination, lack of fresh air, sewage, open drain, impure water. So it becomes obvious again that architecture and health are interlinked. And this is not architecture with fancy buildings and all that, but just organized, livable spaces. It is in how we live in our environments is how we are body. So the body is not an independent organism just floating around in outer space. It's living and engaging with the environment. So the moment you say body, there is an environment. So therefore, the moment you talk about health, there is an environment. So the two are just closely interlinked. A German philosopher, Ludwig Feuerbach, said that we are what we eat. We are what we eat. But I would like to just add here that what we eat is also where we are, because what we eat typically is gathered from where we are. Nowadays, they can be flown from elsewhere. So it is that where we are, where, I emphasize that, where we are and how we should be there is the domain of the architect. right? So in that sense, I talk about architecture is bigger than architecture. Okay, yes, slides. So I have some thoughts on share with you. You know, there's a lot of things I can do talk about the city. This is another area that I and my colleagues work on. But let me share you some basic thoughts on the city. And I've already mentioned the relationship, conceptual relationship between city architecture and the body, and making architects from the in European Renaissance period onwards and now globally, they talk about the biological analogy for architecture, that how the building should also perform like the body. In any case, what I wanted to mention is that the city is perhaps the greatest innovation carried out by humans. You know, there are no other such innovation as the city. The city is not, you cannot find the city in nature. We made it. And in cities, among other things, the things that's most celebrated is the virtues of sociality and proximity, being together, so we can come together. I'm showing you two images, you know, I'm just random images. One on the left is an old drawing of the ancient city of Tenochtitlan in Mexico, which was built on a giant lake. The lake doesn't exist anymore. And the one on the right is the city of Masdar in Abu Dhabi, which is now being built as a model sustainable city, just like showing you two images of ideal cities. You know, this is another thing, not only architects, leaders, social leaders imagine what should be an ideal city. Anyway, whatever the ideal city is, the desire for our proximity and being together is part of the city. With the increasing complexity of the city, humans have developed newer forms of collectivity and association. You know, the internet. So when the internet arrived, which is also another epochal invention of the human, it seemed the very rationale of the city would be nullified. You don't need the city. If you have the internet, you can be anywhere and be connected and be together, you know, Zoom and whatnot. What is the need for physical proximity represented by the city? You know the name of Victor Hugo, who wrote The Hunchback of Notre Dame. In that book, there is a line that this will kill that. He meant the book. So when the book arrived in a big way, so the book arrived many years ago, but the book as a popular tool, everybody can have it. That's a very new thing. 18th, 19th centuries. He said the book will kill that, the book will kill architecture. He pointed to the Cathedral of Notre Dame, you know, so the Cathedral of Notre Dame, he used it as a metaphor, but he meant you don't need the cathedral anymore because, you know, in the cathedral people get together. In the cathedral you hear stories. On the walls of the cathedral there are various sculptural narratives. You know, before the internet people got their information from the cathedral or temples or other such religious places, or even mosques where people gathered and got information. But if you have the book, you know, you can just stay home and get your information. So this will kill that. So the cathedral was seen as the, you know, singular, not as a singular work of architecture, but as an emblem of the city. The cathedral is the city. Yet, it seems the internet, the book, or the mobile phone has not made the city redundant. Not yet, at least. The need for human congregation and the necessity for assembly and immediacy is as intense as ever, you know, showing you slides of Philadelphia during COVID. In fact, we are at a historical turning point where more humans live on Earth than ever before. So very soon it will be a planetary city. Most people will be living, most people are already living in cities. Even in Bangladesh, where only a few years ago we could call it an agricultural civilization. Now, more people live in urban areas in one form or another. Think about that. And as with any human innovation, from the city to the mobile phone, from the book to the internet, there is also a troubling side. All is not well. While the city has led to new forms of collectivity and cooperation and competition and innovation, the city has also bred disquiet and squalor. You know, I've shown you images from London, but think of what's happening around us. It was the critique of that city that led to modern planning. I mentioned that. In Bangladesh, the narrative of the city, that is how we perceive city, has a number of ambiguities, doitota. Amra dutoi chinta kori. On the one hand, we have prided ourselves about our agricultural civilization. You know, you look at the writings of poets, writers, novelists. For example, poet Joshimuddin had an epic line about living in the village, Maya Mamotai Jorajori Kori. Ei je gramer kotha. This is such an emotional, part of our emotional fiber. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, we are experiencing an exponential rise in the urban population of Bangladesh. Bangladesh will soon be a country of towns. So I just want to point out this sort of dichotomy. The 8th five-year plan presents the growth of cities as synonymous with economic development. So I want to tie it up with growth of cities, economic development. There's some technical facts here. What percentage of GDP? 35% of the GDP is provided by Dhaka, only when 8.7% lives in Dhaka of the total population. But the other interesting thing that I want to point out, Bangladesh's first five-year plan, I'm talking about the latest, which is more economically driven. The first five-year plan focused on rural development. It was a magnificent document for a war-torn country, which looked at rural development through cooperative societies, group housing, and compact villages, but that did not happen. So that's history. So, with the single-minded attention to the city as an economic engine, the actual qualities of the city that make it livable has been left unattended. So there is again a disconnect. That is why Dhaka continues to be the least habitable city in the world in many global markers. What we can conclude is that with economists, industrialists, and developers driving the discussion of the city in Bangladesh, we are yet to find our own urbanism. So I wrote a piece in the Daily Star. I already mentioned the name. I should have said in an English daily. Many years ago, in a rhetorical way, that Dhaka is not a city. I wanted to mention all these buildings, infrastructure, they don't often make a city. The city has to be a civil place, as I mentioned before. But the editor suggested I change the title because, so I gave it a more moderate title, nonetheless. So let's talk about Dhaka, and I'll end with Dhaka, and I'll show you a few other things. I haven't checked how much time I have. I can't keep you from your pitas and your lunch. I'll try to, as now I go forward, I'll show you more slides. Okay, I have to show you this. I was going to say, let's talk about Dhaka, the monster that refuses to be tamed. Home to over 16 million people, Dhaka is one of the densely inhabited places on earth. We all know that. Perhaps also the most dynamic, let's not forget. We tend to not talk about it. Dhaka is a very dynamic city, very entrepreneurial. But nonetheless, Dhaka is a metropolis in a furious motion. And beneath that, there are many crises. I don't know how many of you have checked your blood pressure today. It's a urban health issue. Or what is the air quality index today? I don't know, it's like 160 or something, which is still higher than the recommended air quality index. Anyway, I can give you a list of those things. What is dysfunctional about Dhaka? I show this image that both are Dhakas. You know, just if you can imagine an ideal day that you get up and take a transport in 15, without any traffic jam, I tell you, wherever you live in Dhaka, in 15 minutes you'll get to a landscape like that, or 20 minutes. And that's still officially within the boundary of Dhaka, because within Rajuk Dhaka, there are 30% areas declared as agricultural. Can you imagine within Rajuk Dhaka, which is then within the metropolitan area, there are 30% area agricultural, maybe more or less like this. So there is that Dhaka and there is this Dhaka. So I say there are two Dhakas. How do you mediate the two? So I don't have to give you a list of the dysfunctionalities of Dhaka. I want to go straight to what we do as architects. We don't list things, the problems. You know, anybody can do that. Anybody living in Dhaka can list the problems. Journalists do that every day. Every day you open the newspaper, there is something or other. But as an architect, I have that obligation to do something else. I can imagine. I can do a critique. I don't say I'm a foreseer, but I can see a future, you know, among many futures, and I can propose that. I can also draw. And if I combine that, I can perhaps bring up an urban vision of one sort or another. What is possible? So now what I will do is, quickly I will go through some points about the future possibility of Dhaka, which I've done in other places. I've written in newspapers. There's a book published in 2012, Designing Dhaka, and I've spoken in various other forums. This is what I do. I don't want to talk about dysfunctionalities. Anybody can do that. I want to talk about what I, as an architect, can do, present an alternative. And that's a fairly possible alternative. It's not something that is impossible. And the reason I'm doing it today for you, because if you connect all the 12 or 13 or 14 points, that makes for a healthy city, a livable city, in my mind. So I'm working with you on that. 12 points, sometimes I did 10, 14, they keep shifting, but nonetheless, well, these are the signs of dysfunctionality, and this is what happens with Dhaka. One thing I want to point out, and I do that all the time, Dhaka is like an island. There are rivers all around. This is actually a map of the 1988 flood. So the blue shows the presence of the water, which is not exactly like this anymore. Okay, number one point is urbanism, not urbanization. We need to change the narrative on cities, what we think about cities and how we talk about cities. Typically, when we talk about city, or especially Dhaka, we talk in a crisis mode. I call it a crisis culture narrative. We need to get out of that. Typically, we talk about cities with the word urbanization, especially in our part of the world. In Europe, I don't think they use urbanization as a term anymore. You know, the preferred term is urbanism, because urbanization has received a dark connotation. At the one hand, urbanization means the economic, statistical, or technocratic parameters by which a city is organized, but at the same time, it is also about things that are going wrong, overpopulation, health issues, and all that. But the word urbanization does not cater to is to think about the city in its fullest human, social, aesthetical, and ecological potential. And that's why I suggest the word urbanism. Urbanism, in my mind, this is a sort of a vision for the Turag River area. We proposed a linear city along the Turag and live the wetland and the floodplains as it is. But urbanism calls for an enthusiastic embrace of cityness with its humanistic physical fabric and social well-being, and the particular life and quality a city offers. No matter how much you talk bad things about Dhaka, you're not going to leave Dhaka. I'm not going to leave Dhaka. Some people may be. We are in the bowel of the city, and we are here now. We know that, so urbanism means the city must be equitable, its spaces and resources available to all its citizens. Cities must be sustainable so that its growth footprint does not ravage the delicate equilibrium with the environment. And thirdly, cities must be humane, such that their spaces cater to the experience of the human person and not to mechanistic, numeric, or abstract numbers, GDP and all that. Jamie Lerner is a very well-known architect in Brazil, but he was a mayor of a very small city called Curitiba. You can look it up, Curitiba. Curitiba became an ideal city for how a town or a city can grow from a very dark situation to a very uplifting situation, and because of the mayor. It became a classic case. The United Nations recognized it and all that. I listened to Lerner at a lecture, and this is a line that I take to my heart. We need to see the city as a most beautiful thing, an essential human innovation of how we should live together. Number two, every town needs a regional plan. We are currently looking at Dhaka and its region because, if you need to think about the city or planning a city, typically the jurisdiction is within a certain perimeter. For right now, there's a Rajuk perimeter. Initially, it was the city corporation perimeter, and all plan, all resources, all kind of activities were dedicated within the perimeter. But the city refuses to be bounded by that perimeter. It kind of spills out, and the other regional areas come to the city. So I think that relationship between a big metropolis and a city needs to be understood. So we are looking at the Dhaka city and its sort of regional network, and we are considering that a new plan should be proposed where a polycentric constellation of settlements, landscapes, and movements, there are a lot of details here, should be proposed. I'll quickly go through this, So you can also think about reducing pressure on the city, disperse growth. And then the urban centers around Dhaka. We studied 28 small towns around Dhaka. There are more. They can be upgraded if you like, but what kind of city will those centers be? We compared all, 28 towns. The big one is Ghazipur. We compared literacy rate. We compared social infrastructure. I'm sure we can compare health, and you will see that they're all not very same. Third point, we say, this is also our favorite point, follow the flow. We live in the greatest delta of the world. Our life is dependent. If you really look at it, the life of Bangladesh, in every sense, is dependent on how the rivers behave. And the rivers flow, and oftentimes they overflow. And that's when the crisis happens. So we need to really understand that. But what I also argue that Dhaka and the Delta are like this, are at loggerheads with each other, as if Dhaka doesn't care about the Delta. We want to stay dry, push the water out. But you cannot. You live in the Delta, water will come. So this is a water basin map. This is Dhaka city, metropolitan Dhaka. And this is a water basin map, meaning how the water is coming mostly from the north. And this is kind of a basin within which that water circulates. Water from this region will not come here. Water from that region will not come here. So if you really want to talk about the planning of Dhaka, number one should be to find out how water flows. But that's not how planning works in Dhaka. You know, how water flows may be number 13 or 14 in a list of 50. So we also say that water flow should be a new theoretical orientation in design and planning. I think I have a, okay, this is a mapping of Dhaka 1988 and onwards, how not only the water flow, but the network of water has been gradually reduced and depleted. And so this has nothing to do with Dhaka directly, but this is a fascinating mapping that geographers at our institute have done based on available maps. You can see Shondip, Urichar, 1988. But just see how what water flow can do. One thing to note here in Bangladesh, the rivers, it's not only the flow of water, it's also the flow of sediment and silt. So flow means water, sediment, and silt toppling over. And the most fascinating location for that is the coastal areas. Please see this slide. 1994 and onwards. A whole new island is growing, Shornodip. In just 20 years, the size of Shondip, and if I may give a biological analogy here, it's like two cells coming together. You know, I don't know if that happens. And yeah, I think this is just totally fascinating. The size of Shondip is nearly the size of metropolitan Dhaka. So an island is emerging the size of metropolitan Dhaka. And Shondip and Shornodip, as it is called now, together is the size of Singapore. I'm saying this to you because, you know, we are all part of this nation, one way or another. We all have voice. You will take this voice somewhere. What will you do with this island? Does it give you an opportunity to rethink a whole new settlement? A whole new city, the city that we are waiting for that has not yet happened. I mean, right now there are some random settlements by government institutions, but you know, it makes me think, wow, an island the size of Shondip has appeared in 20 years, despite sea level rise. The other thing that is a favorite topic of ours is riverbanks are natural public realms, natural public spaces. We did, and I think I'll go quickly through this. I don't have to look at my notes also. Because it's a riverine country, there's rivers everywhere. In rural areas, the riverbanks are beautifully adapted to the lives of the people. There is no pollution or contamination there, mostly. But I don't know what happens when the rivers run through a town. It's just a disaster. Either we have forgotten how to deal with rivers, or with our aspiration for this magical city, we don't care about rivers anymore. So we spent a lot of time on how riverbanks can be developed. This is a very old sketch from the 1990s, Turag, from the Turag riverbank. This is, again, not only rivers, there are canals. This is, again, an idealized look at what canals bank can be within Dhaka. We were engaged in 2016 by World Bank and Dhaka South City Corporation to look at a stretch of the riverbank between Shuarighat Bridge and Burigong, Shodorghat, the yellow strip. And imagine a public space, and this is one of the visualization. You can see Hassan Manzil, and you wonder if you have ever had the chance to go there. I'm sure if invited, you will refuse to go there. I don't want to go to the bank of Buriganga. What is there? You know, first of all, the river is contaminated, but there is no kind of public kind of space to walk around. It's all very crazy. But there is space, yes, you know, 300, 400 feet wide spaces. So it is possible. We also worked in Sylhet. The yellow is the network of public spaces. And again, for all this work, we were invited by the local authorities to come and do quick studies, which they can take up and perhaps do something about it. In most cases, they haven't happened, but that's fine. We have shared our ideas. And this is what the Shurma riverbank can be. It can be like this, you know, but it's not like what this is, you know, image showing. We worked on the Shitalakha riverbank also, and showing you some possibilities what can happen on the riverbank. I know, and this is a project we did for the mayor of Narayanganj many years ago. Tribini Khal. On the left, the blue stretch is Shitalakha, and Tribini Khal is a 6-kilometer stretch from Shitalakha to Dhaleshwari. So the canal is overcrowded on the edge. So first of all, the canal needs to be restored, but it can't be a public space because it's so overcrowded. So we thought of an interesting idea where you cannot have walkways, you do a crisscrossing by these bridges, you know, and the mayor liked that idea. This may be built, you know, they are working on it. The other thing, considering public spaces, a topic framing the floodplains. You know, the contestation in Dhaka is about floodplains, agricultural areas, and wetlands. You know, they're, you know, what I showed in the earlier map, they're gradually being taken over in the name of development by landfilling and then making plots and making this, you know, houses, which I think is a wrong way to go. So in Dhaka, on the one hand, there is an economic pressure to build, but on the other hand, there's an ecological policies and rules to maintain those, but the two are not mediated. So what we thought that the way to mediate is to think of a third form of urban form that creates a belt or a frame around wetlands or agricultural areas. So, and the belt will include public spaces, as in this case on the right is the wetland. This is on the Turag River. On the other side is the wetland. So that can actually, another way of protection. Laws will not protect. How you prescribe a new form and usage will protect. This is our idea. Okay, I think Okay, I'm showing you a big wetland on the west of Dhaka. So the little spine here is the wetland, Turag River. And just see in the last 20 years, while Shondip was having a neighbor, what Dhaka was doing, what Rajuk was doing primarily, and that's the wetland. You know, the whole thing, the fabulous wetland of such ecological asset has just been destroyed. So this is the wetland, and this is what we propose, creating the wetland, but by framing it by a new development. We also worked on the northeast of Dhaka, again, invited by the mayor. We gave a concept plan, how framing the floodplains and new islands can create housing. So public spaces are also an important topic for us, and I already mentioned that, you know, why public spaces are important in the context of a city. And we forget that for the public spaces, as well as for the city, the most important measure, module, is the human person. Right? We forget that. You know, we think of large infrastructure zooming in and out, but the scale of the human and what I can do as being a human, how much can I walk, stretch, and all that, that is not catered to. We propose creating public spaces. You know, I agitated over sidewalks. I can agitate over public spaces also. Dhaka does not have public spaces, you know. I've seen people sitting on the sidewalk to make it a public space. Of course, this sidewalk is a public space, but like really public space, proper public spaces of different scales. Gulshan 2 Circle, not very far from here, which is just a road intersection. You know, why does it have to be a road intersection? Make it just a pedestrian public space. And there's an outer ring around. We did the study with traffic planners, and you can see this is an image of the Gulshan 2 Circle, and this is the outer ring. You can do a one-way circle like in Piccadilly Circus, you know, or other places, you know, and it is absolutely viable. And you make it a lively public space rather than a space for cars. If you cater to the cars, which we are, will never solve your problems. More and more cars will come. And I've seen footpaths being taken out 2 inches, 3 inches, 6 inches, as if that will solve your traffic problem. It will not. It will just make the city more inhumane. And we have done other projects. This is a Kala Kopa Upojila. So I'm showing you different scales of public spaces where we did a public space around an existing pond, and on the top is the Kaligonga River. Even going down to the smaller scale, a little garden, a little park. We have a number of new parks in the city, but I have a little problem with that. You know, they've been done by colleagues of mine. They're called parks, but they're really play fields. I just go into a park, want to sit on a bench under a tree, you know, and just be there. I don't have spaces like that in this city. And of course, the sidewalk, let's not talk about it anymore. We also created a footpath guideline for the city, which we have not published yet, you know, along with the road guideline and all that. We should have it, you know. Nobody has it. No city corporation has a footpath guideline. You know, it's done in arbitrary ways. There are footpaths which are 3 feet high. Nowhere in the world is a footpath with 3 feet high. And then you have to provide staircases to get up on the footpath. Trees are an existential necessity, of course, you know, and then think about the health of the city. What can you do without trees? I don't have to remind you about this, but just to note that, of course, you know, although cities and trees are, you know, they don't know what to do with each other. You have to make cities by cutting down trees. You know, where will you find space? So the ideal city in the mind of city makers and developers in Dhaka is a city without trees. Just get rid of the trees and we'll just make buildings. That's the ideal vision, their ideal vision. But that's such a disastrous vision because without trees, trees absorb pollutants in the air, catch rainwater, minimize heat, they provide shade, whatnot. They're a foil for climate change effects. We recently did a competition, international competition for the city of Kharkiv in Ukraine. Just to show you, you know, we presented a lot of trees. And this is not our project. This is by Michael Sorkin, a very well-known architect and a friend of ours. He passed away during COVID. What a disaster. But he produced this very imaginary visions of Manhattan. So not only trees, but plants and food production. The moment you say trees, plants, and you get into food production, the city can be self-sufficient with food. Housing, well, another deadly topic because there's no housing in Dhaka. Will you agree with me? Just a pile of buildings, apartment after another, or whatever small building after another, doesn't make housing. Housing means a collection, a group together. Like in rural areas, bari ruthaner chardike ghar hoy, ota ekta housing. But we don't have housing. We don't have social housing. We don't have mass housing. We don't have group housing. What is wrong here? A city without housing, although apartment buildings are claimed by developers as housing, which I refuse to accept, right? Housing is about a network of spaces. It's not about the unit, it's about the network of spaces. You go there, you know, you have a community, you get together. There are maybe few examples, but Dhaka doesn't have housing. So we experimented with new typologies of housing and also housing in critical areas. As I said, framing critical ecological areas, framing the wetlands with housing. I think they should be a little animated. And we also thought of an agricultural housing. Maybe the building is too much, by agricultural housing is that let us not waste agricultural areas because agricultural areas are also decreasing. So there will be roads. Why not create housing on the roads and retain the agricultural areas as it is? Small towns. So you don't have to think only of Dhaka, you need to think about our small towns, and there are various scales and sizes, but we have not given much attention to small towns also, because small towns are developing in the image of Dhaka, while Dhaka itself is mostly a dysfunctional city. Mostly, not all. So in most small towns that I go to, Kumilla, such a beautiful town. If anybody here from Kumilla, I love Kumilla. I did my, oh, you're from Kumilla. What is happening with Kumilla? So there are these beautiful dighis and the neighborhood is organized around the dighi, which is the idea of a housing, 2-story houses. Okay, there are now demands for new building, but now 14-story towers are popping up. So you don't care about the ground floor anymore. You don't care about the horizontal relationship anymore. And that's happening in all cities. So the choice of building types is important. So the counter response will be, how will I have units? Well, you can have units by making horizontal buildings. It's a solution that you need to look for, but you are not looking for that solution. Anyway, we worked on Sylhet, we worked on Narayanganj, we worked on more rural areas, Manoharganj in Laksham. Okay, I'm coming to the end. I think this should be tiring you out. The edge is the center, which is a favorite topic of mine. Again, you know, I already mentioned that Dhaka has agricultural areas around it, even within metropolitan Dhaka. What will you do with them? The biggest battle for the future of Dhaka is fought at the edge, where the wetlands and the floodplains are. You know, if you look at Dhaka, Purbachal, Chilmil, Uttara North and all that, they were all beautiful wetlands. They're all being filled up for a residential plan that is just one alternative. There are other alternatives, and we have done that to make a city which is more crisis-filled than solution-filled. So that's why I say the edge is the center of the battle. And therefore the edge is the center. I don't have to worry about, you know, this particular area. This can be whatever it is. But that area, the edge of Dhaka, I mentioned Dhaka is an island. That edge, which is a critical ecological edge, but that's where the eyes of everyone is. If you go along Purbachal 300 feet road all the way to Bhulta, this housing, that housing in the paddy fields. How is that? We should have both paddy fields and housing. That should be the solution, but show me one of those. So the edge is the center. This is the embankment on the western side. I can't really remember where it is. So if you can see that image, it's a very telling image. You can see sand piled up, brick or brick chips piled up. They come by boats. And you can see the distant building. So what you see is that boats bring the building materials for building the city. And it is coming up. And where is this material coming from? From the delta. You know, the sand from the river deltas, the bed of the river. The material for brick, the clay, comes from the delta. So they come from the delta, we transform it into bricks, cement, and what have you, and then we are making those buildings that we all live in on the horizon. But the most interesting thing is this little guy with his fishing structure. So there is still a little vestige of the delta. He is holding on to that fishing. So this conjunction of all these things is very telling. So I show you how Dhaka is being built by these two processes. One is these pipes taking liquid sand. The other is the barges. If you go around anywhere and see a river, you don't see anything but the villain barges quietly going around, taking sand or silt from one part and taking it elsewhere and making this fabulous city of Dhaka. So we have a plan that we are working on. Again, this is our own research initiated plan. That's Turag River, that's Uttora, and this is the huge floodplain. So how can we think of this edge of the floodplain in terms of new urban form that I was talking about? And these are some of our exercises. I won't go into detail with this. These are some of our exercises. Number 10, mobility is very important, of course, to keep a city running and healthy. We are very glad, I'm very glad that the MRT is here, but just one so partial. I know that in the list of things the government wanted to do with transportation, MRT was number 1, became number 3, number 4, then became elevated road. So more energy was given on roads and elevated roads. That won't solve your traffic problem. For a city of this population, mass transit, nothing else. I think all energy should go into mass transit. So in 2017, we proposed and presented or published the idea of a light rail transit, ringing Dhaka, a circular one. And then we knew that MRT is coming. And I actually wrote about mass transit way before, This is only natural. I was not being very brilliant about it. A city like this needs a mass transit. And I was happy that mass transit, even in a very segmental way, came. But I think there are other models of mass transit that can be explored, whether elevated or on the road. And we talked about an LRT, light rail system. And we did all kind of calculation that by cost and passenger numbers, it could be a highly successful thing. Okay, last slide. There's a Latin phrase I love very much. I don't know if as scientists you use that. Festina lente. Make haste slowly. Dhire taratari. So with city building is one such thing. Certain things you see happening very in a big jump start, but then the city is being built in a very gradual way, slowly, cumulatively, and with collective decisions and all that. So we should know that. That is also the challenge of the city, and which is what we do as not expanding the idea of architects as urban designers and landscape designers. So we also do public activism. All these ideas that we are sharing here. I'm sharing here perhaps if in the slightest way you think that's not a bad idea. I hope in other forums you'll take it up and it's kind of a public pressure that our idea circulates. We are sharing this idea. We have done this without being engaged by anyone. We did it on our own and we're sharing this with you and perhaps we'll adopt these ideas and take it with you. I'm showing you this letter. We worked in Manikganj and we catered to a group of people in the town, and I love this, the letter that they wrote to the architects, dear architects, all the way down, that we need your help in that way or this way. I mean, this was the communication we had to open up, and this is very essential in thinking about or making cities, that we think of a modern Manikganj where history, heritage will be retained, the canals will be retained. It was a beautiful, moving letter. I keep it very close to my heart in terms of what we do as architects and urban designers. And this is the last slide. Well, of course, whenever the occasion comes, and thank you, Dr. Tahmid Ahmed, I talk about this. We publish books. We have forums with the people of the city in Sylhet. We did exhibition in Sylhet. It was the first time an exhibition of the ideas were presented to the people. And then let me tell you that, when we did that 2018, I was a bit unsure because how will people in Sylhet take it? There's people from Dhaka coming with big ideas for our Sylhet. Nothing like that happened. In fact, we had the display and everything. I went 2 or 3 days later. our volunteers from Dhaka were removed and they took over and they were explaining, this is what can happen, that is what can happen. I felt very good about that, so adopting that. And also we had exhibitions on Dhaka here. Okay, so I think I come to my end. I hope I have not dragged this for too long. And I hope in one way or another, it expands our notion of what we think of health and the city. Thank you. Do I have to be here or I'm done? I mean,
Thank you, Dr. Ashraf, for your thought-provoking and inspiring presentation. Your insights on architecture's broader role in shaping healthy cities resonate deeply with our mission here at icddrb. So, as we conclude the special session, let us carry forward the ideas that is shared today and continue to striving to create a healthier and more suitable world. So before we wrap up, I just want to I like to invite you all to join us for the exciting activities that we are having today. Number one is Fun Fair Marketplace. So you already know that we have some stalls outside, and our excellent colleagues, they have been showing their crafts and foods as well. So you can go there, enjoy the craft and foods and purchase them. And also we have a cultural program at 2 p.m. We're going to come back here at 2 and it will run up to 5 p.m. And our excellent colleagues will perform some cultural activities, including myself. So we invite you all to enjoy.